Hi everyone, my name's Jese Navaranjan and I work at a data consultancy called Altius. I work with Power BI and also Power Apps. And today I'm going to be giving a talk on how to use SVGs within Power BI. So there's my Twitter handle. If you like this talk, do follow me or do reach out to me. I will be putting up all the material and the Power BI files that I used today in the shared location, so I'm sure you'll get a copy of that. Ooh. So just before we start, if we start with a couple of these questions, so Jan, if you can please put these questions up.
There you go, first one is up.
Cool. Thank you. And this is just for me to get an idea of if people have used SVGs, if you use DAX, and if you use them in your reports as well. So if we have the second question up, do you use DAX?
Let me close this one. There's almost 70% of people who have voted.
Okay, so let's see the results when they come up.
There you go. Do you see them?
I do not see them.
Okay, well, pronounce them or announce them.
Yeah.
So about 70% of the people
Yep.
actually know what an SVG image file is,
Okay.
and 30% are hoping that you will fill them in.
Great. Okay. So if we move on to the second question, do you use DAX?
There you go.
Give everyone a minute to answer that.
The results will shock you. Really, really shock you. About 30% of the people are like, I'm not even voting on this.
Okay.
I kind of understand them. I'll close the poll now and show you the results. 100% of the people say yes.
Yay.
That's good, right?
That's awesome. That's really good. And the last question, have you used SVGs in your reports?
Okay. Now this is the one I'm curious about. Ooh, that's exciting. You know, we were talking about it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave this open for a couple of more seconds because it started out bad for me, but it's going my way right now. It's going,
Going your way? Okay.
yeah.
We had a bit of a conversation before this, so I wonder who's got the number closer.
Come on, vote on this. You can do it.
Come on, we need to
Some
get the last
people.
30% to vote as well.
Yeah, 80% voted.
Okay.
Shall I close it?
Yep.
There we go. So 33% of the people have used SVGs before in the reports.
Okay. Jan, you win.
It's a cool topic to talk about, and people will really love it. I'm
Yeah.
sure of it. Um,
Great.
yeah,
Okay,
all
so that
yours.
that was really good. So it kind of helps me understand what the knowledge on the call is, and it kind of helps me decide how I'm going to run the rest of the talk as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so the reason I chose to speak about this topic is I had a client who had asked for something quite bespoke. So I thought I'd share that first to kind of set the scene for why I got introduced into SVGs. So what we're looking at here is essentially a number of different, say, regions, for example, within an organization. They have their results displayed across the last 13 months. And
We're
what these
going to interrupt you
boxes,
for a moment. Sorry about that. We're not seeing your screen at the moment.
oh, you're not? It says people can see your screen.
You're still seeing the ball. Yeah, perfect now. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so just to recap, the reason I chose to do the SVG topic is I had a client project on which I was asked to create something a little bit bespoke. I looked at the custom visuals, I looked at various things I could do, and I had two options really, develop a custom visual or use SVG, so that's what I did. So this image here, what it shows is for each of the last 13 months, for example, these could be various divisions within your organization. What this box shows is the rating that they had within this organization for the current month. So that's blue rating. And then the color outside is the previous month. And there's also text inside. That's maybe the project code or the rating description. So the idea is that all of this is actually generated from data. So I'm not drawing anything on the page, well, I am, but using data. So that's the background for why I got interested in SVGs. So the inspiration I took for this presentation I'm giving today is 3 different blogs that I read. So I wanted to call those out and make sure you do have a read of these as well, because they're really good. So David Eldersfeld did a 3-part blog on using SVGs in Power BI and the use of Inkscape as well, which is something they use quite heavily in this presentation. Casper de Jong, who has a blog about KPIs, which we'll come on to, and Brian Gant on Sparklines. So thank you guys for your inspiration. What we'll be covering today is what is an SVG, what is Inkscape, that will become clearer, how to change colors of SVG images in Power BI, how to create trends in images to use in tables and matrix visuals, how to create trend lines in Power BI, and how to create custom images using Inkscape, and then applying those DAX calculations. So I've called out 2 links here. The first one is icon libraries, where we can actually find SVG images. I promise I will explain what they actually are shortly, and Inkscape. So that's a useful image for when we come, a useful link when we come on to talk about that shortly. Okay. So what is an SVG image? SVGs are a vector graphic format. They're based on XML and they're used to display a variety of graphics on the web. So in plain English, what they really are is they're just text files, and they describe lines, curves, shapes, colors, and text. They're human readable, so you can actually read this text file and see how this image is built up. So we're going to have a look at some examples of that in a second. So just as a comparison, if we look at a JPEG image on the left-hand side and an SVG image on the right-hand side, you see that when you scale it up, actually I think my own image is a bit pixelated with the writing here, but we can see clearly that this icon is a lot clearer when it becomes bigger in comparison to this JPEG image. So if we now have a look at some examples of what SVG code looks like, this is a lime green rectangle. So we can see it's just a rectangle, and within SVG, we can specify a rect. So SVGs always start with SVG at the start and SVG at the bottom to kind of encode the code within it. So we've got a width for this rectangle, we've got a height for this shape, we've then got a position, so an X and Y, we've got the color, which is black, so this stroke is black, and the fill for this image is lime. So already you can immediately see that there are things within the SVG code that we could probably start changing. So for example, if we take this fill, which is lime, maybe your data has a 1 to 10 rating, and you've got various colors that you can assign to those 1 to 10 numbers, and we can actually change that. If we have a look at this red circle at the bottom, we've also got circle. So we've actually got some actual names that can be used, real names. So similarly, we have a width, a height, we have a radius of this circle, so that's very circle specific, the stroke, and the red. Now with this fill, you can also use hex colors, so that looks like a hash and then a series of 6 letters or numbers as well, which I'll be using. So we can see up here, top right, we actually have a star, but this time we have a path. So this is not there is a star SVG as well, but actually this one follows a path. And the code within here tells you how to get through that path. And as I alluded to earlier, the fill is actually a hash here. So hash FB2, hash BBB, which is the black color, which is the stroke. Bottom right, we can actually put 2 images together or multiple images together. SVG images can be very complex. These are quite simple examples just to set the scene. So here you've actually got 2 rectangles. So you've got your first rectangle, it's described here. You've got your second rectangle, you've got it here, and that's described in terms of position as well. And then you've got the opacity as well. So that blue one is a little less, or yeah, more opaque, less opaque. So that's that. So Inkscape is a tool which can actually draw SVGs. So it's a professional quality software. It's open source, so you can actually download it from the internet. And I use it because it's a nice way of actually developing exactly what you want. You can go to the internet and find icons to use within your Power BI report. But when you want something quite bespoke, it's a nice way to do something quite quickly and easily. So we'll be looking at that as well. So now onto the fun part. Let's actually go over to Power BI. So the first thing I'm going to show is how we can draw an SVG image and then use that in Power BI. And I'm going to import some colors and we're going to change the color on our Power BI report. So I've already got Inkscape downloaded. We've got the link on the PowerPoint. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a star. So we're just going to start with this little star. And you saw how easy that was. So I just kind of use some of these set images. You can get quite complicated on Inkscape, but we're going to keep, for the purpose of this demo, the Inkscape part quite simple. So I'm going to resize this page so that we have the star right in the center. And I'm going to file, save as, and you see that this type here is an Inkscape SVG. I'm just going to replace this where it's called star, just for ease, but it's just called star, and it's just going to replace that file right there. Now, the way we import this into Power BI is we get data, and we actually have to bring it in as a folder and do a little bit of manipulation to get the image file. So I'm going to get it in like so. I'm going to browse, and it's in this folder here. Going to go ahead and edit that. And actually, all I want, you could have various SVGs within that, but for now all I want is this star SVG. So all I've done is chosen that as a folder. I'm just going to rename this because that's not a great name. So let's call that star. Now what we now have to do is do a encoding. So, and there's a few different steps that you have to do in order to actually get Power BI to read it. But once you've done it a few times, it becomes quite straightforward, and you'll have some of this actual code written in the PowerPoint documents. So we're going to insert step after, and I'm actually going to do exactly that. So we do this encoding. So I'm just going to copy it up here. So I inserted a custom step. And what that now does is it brings out the SVG code. So actually, you can see here, just a preview. If I make that a little bit bigger, you can see that it's got similar to the simpler examples we looked at, so the width and the height. We've got, because this is an Inkscape SVG, there's a few Inkspace letters written in, and that's more for marketing really. So we have that ready. Now I don't really want any of this information at the front, so if I add that as a new query, I'm going to call that star. Oh, right, let's call this star. Call this star. So that's ready. So let's go ahead and look at this on our canvas and see what we see. Okay, so if we look at this text field that's going to come out, we can see that at the moment it's just text. It's just come out as a text image. So we need to do some extra encoding within here, which will actually let Power BI know that it's an SVG file. So what I will do is add a measure and add this text. So data :image / SVG, which is an XML format and has this UTF-8 encoding. And actually, I called it star. Oops. So let's call it star here. And now it's a column here, but what we need to do, and this is the important part, is the data category must be an image URL. So if I now change that to an image URL and I put my SVG image on the canvas, it's now appeared as a star. Okay, so that's step one, not massively useful just yet. It's a start just to introduce. Now what we'll do is we'll start manipulating just the color of this star here. So I'm going to get some data, and it's an Excel file, and just to make sure I get the right one, we've got the hex colors for the star. I'll show you what's in that data. So if you go ahead and edit that. So what this is something that I found on the World Wide Web. It's essentially hex colors and their corresponding names in a few different languages. And the idea is that I want to be able to change the color of the star to all these different colors here. So just a dummy data set to start with. So first what I need is I actually want the SVG code on every row of this data set, because I want to be able to change it based on what the user selects. So what I will do is I will add a column, create a custom column, and I just want star SVG. And that has now taken each of the SVG code and put it in each row. So now we have a look at that on the canvas. We now have another piece of DAX, which I will explain. So if we have a look at this hex colors star, I'm going to add a new column. And if we first talk through what it says, and then I called it star. So what this is doing is it's first taking the SVG code, so that's hex colors underscore star SVG, which is what we imported. And then it's doing a substitute. So this substitute says that wherever you see this hex, then substitute it with the hex colors within our data. Now, where did I get this 0000FF? If we look at this actual code, we will find that there's a fill here. So this style and fill says 000FF. So 0000FF is actually the color for this blue. So every time we see this blue color, we're going to replace it with a color from our data. So now what I'll do is I'll pull in colors, but first we need to change colors to be an image URL. And also now if we pull in the corresponding English name, I'm sure there are other language speakers on the call, but just to keep it simple. And now we can see that it's changed the color, so it's picked up all of the colors and they all look pretty bright. So we've got some pretty interesting colors here. Pastel violet, Toronto purple. Okay, so I'm just going to rename that. Okay, just checking to see if there are any questions. Okay, so what we've just gone through is how to take the color, a star image, and change the color. So as you saw, there's a few different encodings that we have to do in order to actually read that SVG file. And also we need to make sure that we change the image to be a image URL, sorry, an image file within Power BI as well in the format. Okay. The next thing we'll have a look at is KPI indicators. So if you have a table, as you can see on the left, what we can also do is use SVG images to say if it's a certain number or below a threshold, then we want a certain image to be displayed. So in this example, what I'm showing here is that we have these regions, Central, East, and West. And this piece of DAX, so this particular example is all DAX. There isn't any image from Inkscape that I'm using, it's fully on DAX. So here, what it's showing is that, and we'll look to this part first, is if the total sales is above 7,000, and I've hard coded that, but of course we can do something a bit more intuitive as well in terms of looking within the data and setting a threshold. So if it's above 7,000, then show a green arrow saying that it's high. If it's below 2,500, show a red arrow showing that it's going down. And a blue arrow is neutral. So again, this is quite a simple example, but we could take this further and actually look at changes. So if the sales changes month on month, then show a down arrow and up arrow. And this actually means that you bring all these images within your table, and it's not something that sits in a custom visual anymore, and you can have much more control in terms of how you want that to look. So talking through this code, so I already kind of alluded to this bottom bit at the bottom here. So I'm using a switch formula in DAX. So what this means is if the following condition is true, then show this. So it says that if the sum of the total sales is above 7,000, then show this image. And I've actually set these variables up here. So that's where you have variable, 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 but we'll come on to that. If the sum is below 2,500, then show the SVG underscore down variable. And if not, then show SVG underscore neutral. Now, if we have a look at the actual variable set, so the first one in blue is for this circle. So we've set a few variables here for the radius, for the color, the opacity, but actually the main one here is the variable for SVG underscore neutral. So actually you could change the size of this as well based on other bits within the data. So rather than setting the various as something hard coded, you could set that as distance or some other numeric value. So within here, I've set it to be a circle, as we saw earlier. The radius, the color, the fill is just set. It's not changing. So that's that. We have SVG up, which is another variable, and those are polygon points because it's a triangle. It's kind of a stretched out triangle there, so we've got that. And variable down, which is similar to the one above, except the fill is red, and in the green one, the fill is green. So yeah, that's our code there. So let's see how this actually looks in Power BI. So to do this, I'm going to import another data set, and we'll get data from Excel. And this time it's called sales data underscore KPI. Which is this table here. And let's just have a quick look at it so that we can get a feel for the data first. So what we have here is regions. We have order dates, a representative, an item, units, unit cost, and the total that item generated. So if we close and apply. So in the first example, we looked at adding a column. This time, we're going to add a measure. So new measure, and I've actually changed, apologies. So it's actually called sales orders. Okay, so this is the same code that we saw on the PowerPoint. So if we close that down, I've just added that as a measure and we've called it KPI. Just give that a second. And if we remember, we need to make sure to change that to an image URL. I'm then going to pull in the region and pull in the KPI, and we've now got the data showing in a table. So I just want to point out here that we could actually also use a matrix here, but I haven't set up the data to really fit a matrix visual. But if I were to, actually it works, the numbers work. So yeah, we can see that in the central region, binder, which is an item, I'm not sure what that is neutral. Desk didn't sell as much really. And then actually, yeah, only the totals go up to the higher value, which I set because I hard coded that. Okay, so to recap, we've just had a look at how to use KPIs within Power BI, and this is only a beginning to all the things that can actually be done. Okay, next we'll have a look at trend lines. So this is a very cool thing within Power BI using SVGs. So what we can actually do is, rather than creating graphs, we can have the graph sit within our actual table or within our matrix visual. So this is great because it will save a lot of space. It will actually give the user a quick indication of what's happening rather than creating many tables. SVGs load quite quickly as well, depending on the amount of data. Of course, when the DAX gets more complicated, it can take a little bit longer as well. But in general, it's if it's quite a simple calculation, it can load quite quickly, I've found. So on the left-hand side, the end result we want to get to is the retailer country listed down this side and the Sparkline. So in this particular example, I'm actually using years. So we need to have some kind of axes, which is numeric on the x-axis, so a date or a year or something we're plotting against. So here there are just 4 years, just 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see in Austria, for example, the sales again, so this is sales data again, has gone up and peaked in the 3rd year and then went down again. And that's actually pretty similar across the board for these retailer countries. So the way we do this is, again, I'm not using Inkscape for this example. We're actually going to draw on these trend lines. So I'm going to just kind of talk through this DAX code. Again, this is a simple example. What we could also do on top of this is change color based on DAX results. We can actually add circles here based on other data points within the data. We can try and add an axis. There's a lot of things that we could do. So to start, there's a few variables that are set again. So the first variable, line color, it's setting the color of the trend line. These variables here, so variable x min date and x max date, is setting the minimum and the maximum for the x-axes. So what we're actually doing in this whole DAX formula is just plotting our points in an x and y axes and splitting that over in a 100 view box. That will make more sense as I walk through this. These variables, y min value and y max value, are calculating the minimum and maximum of our x-axes, namely the sum of our sales total, which will determine the size of the y-axes. We then build the table of x and y coordinates and fit that to a 100 view box. So this maps the x and y and spreads them across a 100 grid, so therefore representing the shape of the data. So these aren't, it represents the shape, but we can't necessarily see the exact points on this particular example. We then concatenate that together to build the Sparkline. We then add to an SVG. So again, we have this encoding that we saw earlier. So data : image / SVG plus XML UTF-8. And this is basically building that SVG image from all the variables set above. And then we return the SVG image URL, which is essentially this variable, but with all the various components of the data. Okay, so in order to do this, you may have noticed there's actually a sum in here somewhere. Let's just put that into DAX. It might be into Power BI. It'll be easier to see. Actually, first let's get some data. So get data from Excel, and this time I'm going to use the Sparkline data. Again, I'm going to go in and have a look at the data first, just to get a feel. So let's edit that. Okay, and what this is another kind of sales data. We've got years, we've got product lines, product types, some revenue, and some quantities, etc. So if we now use that. So we used total sales here. So in order to do this, we actually need a measure to plot the Sparkline against. So first, I'm going to create a measure. I'm just going to call it sum to keep it easy. And I just want the sum of the, let's go for gross profit. Okay, I'm then going to create another measure, this time using all of the code. And here, yeah, this is what I was looking for. So the sum is what our y-axis is. So as I use gross profit, it's going to block gross profit. And that's going to be against the retailer country. So the retailer country is going to be what's going to categorize our data. So now I'm going to change that into an image URL like before. And now if we pull in the retailer country as a table, not in a map, and then pull through our Sparkline, we will see that the data has now been generated in that same way. Okay, so we've just had a look at using trend lines within Power BI. So the next thing I wanted to show is custom images. So this is kind of similar to why I first started looking at SVGs myself. So this example here is similar to what I did for my client. So these are our ratings. So I've used stars to kind of fit in with the theme. And what our end goal that we want to produce is we want the color inside the star to be the current rating, and we want the color outside to be the previous rating. So there's various bits of data I'm going to pull in, it will become clearer. But essentially we use these two DAX formulas. So the first one is just substituting based on two different colors, so the two different colors on the ratings. I have a ratings table which shows me the colors for each rating, and also adding text. So adding text is just a little bit more of SVG code, but I'm actually pulling this text from my data. It's fairly straightforward to do, but I think it's quite a nice way of actually bringing that image to life. So let's actually build that image first. So we've already got this star that we were using before. I'm now going to just place another star on top. So maybe something like this. Just going to move it around a bit so it's here. I'm going to save this one. Ooh, save a copy. Yeah, just save as. I'm just going to replace this as I already have this and I don't want too many stars in my folder. So replace that. It's called Star Custom. So let's go ahead and pull that into our file. I'm going to reuse what I have already just because I have this star SVG which we used earlier, and well, it's the same, but it's just pointing to a different location. So where I've got my filtered rows, I actually just want to pick up my star custom and not my star. So let's use that. And similarly, I want to take the code. So the SVG code is here. So let's add that as a new query and call it star custom SVG. Okay, so I do need some further data to actually bring this to life now. So I'm going to bring in a few more data sets and I'll explain them. So let's bring in some ratings data. Just this one. So what this here is showing, and there's a few extra columns we don't need there, so I'm just going to remove those. We have an ID, so we can assume that these are people or projects, and they have a rating. So they have a rating of 4, 8, 4, etc. But they also have a previous rating, and we want to visually show how this could look. But we also want some colors and maybe some text to match that data. So I'm going to pull in that as well, which is this hex colors, _ star custom. And this is quite a simple table, but I did build it from scratch. So it's quite easy to get the hex colors from the internet. So I just kind of have a hex converter and I find out the colors I want. So I've got this rating here. So a rating of 1 is an A, so you get an A rating. And the corresponding hex color is #5, B9, BD5, rating of 2, rating of 3, etc. So now what I want to do is within this main file, I actually want that data to be present. So I want those hex colors and those colors. I'm just quickly checking something so I get my wording correct. Yep. So what I'm going to do now is merge on the rating, pick up the colors from star custom. So I basically want this rating text and this hex color to come through on current rating. So I want the rating text and the hex. We already have the rating because that's this rating here, which we're merging on. I'm going to rename that to be current text. So that's the text for the current rating, and this is current hex. So that's the hex for the current. So we've got those pieces of information there. We want to repeat that now for the previous rating. So a very similar step, but this time on the previous rating. So let's go ahead and bring that in as well. And again, I'm just going to bring up the hex and the rating text. So that's previous text and previous hex. Okay, so now I've got my data ready to use within Power BI. So if I just close and apply that now, and if we go back to Power BI, I've got my first formula, which I'll explain. So it's taking in that encoding again. It will then do two substitutes. It's going to substitute the first color, and we're going to check those again in the SVG code. And then it's going to substitute the second color based on the data points in our data. So let's start with a new sheet. SVG star. And we are in the ratings data, and we'll create a new column this time because we want our image to be done for each column. We haven't actually pulled in the SVG image, so that would help. Let's edit that. So if we go into ratings data, what we're missing here is actually the SVG image, which is star custom SVG. So let's add a column, custom column. Let's go star custom SVG. Star custom SVG. So now we have the actual SVG text to work with to substitute. And let's just use the same again. So we have our data here, but what we do need to check now is check those colors we want to substitute. So there are various ways of checking this, but for the purpose of this, we're just going to look within the actual code. So we see here that the first kind of fill is 000FF, which is the same. Let's look at it on our hex. So that's here. So that's the previous. And actually the first one is up here. 1 second. No. So that's our first one. And our second fill is here, FF2A2A. So let's replace those in. So I appreciate it's probably quite small. I'm pretty squinting my eyes here. 2A2A. And the first one was the same as what we had. I'm just going to check because I can't seem to find that, which is the same as the star we used before, which was 0000FF. Let's use that here. Okay, so if these are wrong, we'll come back to them, but I think that should be right. So now what we'll do is we'll change DAX hex to be an image URL as well. And now we'll see how that looks. So if we take our ID as a table and then pull in our DAX, we can see that the image has now changed based on the data. So let's actually pull in a key for this, because it doesn't make much sense without knowing what those colors mean. So we've got this key here. So for this one, it's ID1, the current rating is a 5 and the previous rating was a 1. So it's a quick way of actually seeing that. We'll now also add some text using this. So we want to create a column as well within ratings data and add that text. And what this is showing is how big, small the text is, the font family, so you can actually use fonts, change the font size, the positioning, so this is actually the positioning here, the fill, so I'm using just black text, and in fact that's an SVG. So again, I've got DAX with hex here. I'm going to change the data category to be an image URL, and also pull that into our table to show the comparison here. And again, this can also be used in a matrix visual. So currently the data here only has one kind of categorization, but if there were other categorizations, you could also show that as well. Okay, that's all I had. There's a couple of minutes left. I don't know if there are any questions from anyone.
At the moment, no. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's about it. Unless people now start asking all the questions. But when you're working with this, when you're explaining this to customers and developers at the customer, what do they mostly ask you? Because I can imagine they have a lot of questions working with SVGs.
I think it depends on your client, because a lot of end users, in terms of clients, don't always know how what is in front of them gets to them. They just care that it gets there.
Yeah.
So it depends on the user. There are some users where I've actually gone and explained, and it's quite exciting. And if they're using Power BI, I can explain how I did it. But otherwise, in all honesty, not all clients are actually concerned about how it gets on the page, as long as it works.
Okay. And regarding performance issues, have you had any so far?
Yep, so I'll be quite honest and say that sometimes I've found that SVG images don't always render on certain browsers. So sometimes on IE or Chrome or Firefox, I actually forget which one didn't work now, but I've had to raise that with Microsoft, and it is a known issue, which I think they fixed now. But that was because SVG images, using them in this way in measures and columns, correct me if I'm correct, anyone that knows, but I'm pretty sure it was only introduced last August. So it's fairly new. It's not always been around in this way to use as measures and as within matrices.
Yeah, okay. So do you actually do performance testing using fake data to see if there's any issues, or how do you test for performance?
I haven't really done or come across performance issues myself within here, but I mean, if I were to, you've got tools that are available. Also, just cutting down your DAX helps, and then also just pulling in only the data you need can really help with performance issues.
Yeah, cool. Okay. It seems nobody else has any questions for you. So that just means it was very clear and well done.
All right, well, I hope that was useful. As we said, we'll have all the material available. I'm sure Jan will take the data and get it out to everyone.
Yeah, I will. Cool. So thank you very much, and hopefully until next time.
Cool. Thank you very much.